Hello everyone, my name is Ashley and welcome to the first episode of the Shivers and Screams podcast. This is episode 1, guys. In this podcast we're going to be reading out horror stories, creepypasta stories, true stories, scary stories, and all sorts of scary stories, guys. This is a story driven horror story, scary story driven podcast. So this is for episode 1. In this episode, guys, we're going to be reading. This post comes from Marinero Ron, part under r/scary stories. This one is going to be called Fred the Vampire from My Work. And then in the background we're going to be playing some scary music as well, so to set the mood. So without ado, let's start this first episode of the Shivers and Screams podcast. Let's do this. This started around 4 years ago when I had to work evenings at a restaurant called Popular Sacra. They serve high-end Greek food and had Michelin star ambitions, but never quite got there. This restaurant is next door to a nightclub called Fuzzy's. One day, the owner hired this front-end manager named Fred. Fred, of course, was really pale and tall and had this long raven black hair that was very full and wavy. It came down to just past his shoulders. To be honest though, I was kind of jealous. It was so beautiful. In fact, Fred was rather attractive. At least I thought so at first. He was a little over 6'3", and his eyes were the deepest blue that I've ever seen on a guy. The first evening he started working, I was handling the bar. Fred came over and we started talking and flirting. Fred never once smiled but seemed very polite. Something about him seemed off. For one, he had his reddish look strange scar on his neck. Asked him about it and he said, "Oh, this? That's why I was bitten by a vampire. That's why I must work nights, otherwise I would burn in the sun." I don't know if it was the way he said it in his high-pitched voice or something else, but I was immediately really creeped out by it. Over the next few weeks, I would catch Fred staring at me while I was waiting tables or running back and forth to the kitchen, unashamedly just gawking at me as I tried not to notice him. There's this thing called the halo effect. I think that sometimes allows attractive people to get away with creepy or bad things. Fred was cute, but absolutely did not have this. He went from slightly creepy to outright creeper over the next few days. One Saturday evening, I was off work and shopping at a clothing store in a local shitty mall with my best friend Jessica. I like how they put shitty, as in showing that it was actually a shit mall. We were trying on tops and I needed a different size. Jessica went to grab me one. While I was in the change room alone, I heard this voice timidly shout my name and ask whether I was in there. It was Fred's squeaky voice. He said he saw me in the mall and wanted to come over and say hello. For some reason, he thought coming into the dressing room and doing this was a great idea. I told him, "Hey Fred, I'm just in here trying on some clothes. I'll be out in a minute." After a few minutes, I stepped out and immediately caught him standing right on the other side of the divider curtain that closed off my dressing room. He was waiting for him just inches from where I was standing. I jumped and screamed a little, but for some reason my anxiety forced me to laugh and play it off. I should have yelled and done something, but I didn't. Fred started texting me after that. Really strange texts, talking about stuff like wishing me good morning, with crying and devil and weird memes that I didn't get. One time he asked me whether I lived alone, to which I lied and told him that my fiance lived with me. The next few months was insanity. At the restaurant we lost a few people, including this girl named Bethany, who I would sometimes trade shifts with. He suddenly quit and just never showed back up, leaving me to make up for her slack. Fred oversaw hiring, but dragged his feet on hiring anyone new. I think he used the opportunity to fill in partially for Bethany so he could be close to me. I don't know though, it was all very strange. I was already debating quitting at this point. Even though the tips were incredible, I seriously felt unsafe there. I just couldn't put my finger on it, but something about Fred felt dangerous. So in December, I had decided to quit, but I hadn't told the owner yet. The owner's wife, Cheryl, was having a birthday party one evening at another restaurant that they owned. She invited most of the night staff since it was during the day. We showed up, even Fred, who I saw for the first time in the daylight. Briefly, he ran in from outside wearing a blue baseball cap, scarf and sunglasses before immediately taking them off upon entering the building. During the party, everyone started to drink a little too much, even though it was in the middle of the day. I'd say almost all of us were drunk after an hour or so. Even Fred, whose face turned from ghostly pale to reddish and weird. Suddenly, there was a pause in the early 2000s music they were playing, and Cheryl asked Fred loudly, who was loosened up a bit and acting silly, whether he had a girlfriend. That creep with his messed up hair and squeaky voice smiled and was scratching his neck. They looked straight at me while everyone was watching and said this. No, I just haven't found the right one to sink my teeth into yet. In that weird high-pitched voice before leaning his head back and passing out on the couch. He obviously had way too much to drink. While his head was leaned back on the couch, everyone could clearly see that weird scar they had that was now super red and inflamed. Maybe it was the alcohol, but it looked seriously nasty. I swear I could almost see his heartbeat pulsing in it. Dum dum, dum dum, dum dum, dum dum. Everyone tried to wake him up, but it was totally out. Someone called the EMS, but it took them forever to get there. While we were waiting, someone asked about his scar to me. I told him that I had no idea where he got it from. While we were all looking at it, the weirdest fucking thing that I've ever seen in my life happened. Right there, in the middle of this party, while everyone was looking at him concerned, his red and inflamed vampire bite scar opened and spat out something that hit the floor loudly. Splash! It was the grossest thing I ever witnessed in my entire life. Everyone screamed in shock. Ah! The paramedics arrived a few minutes later and helped take him to the hospital. They looked at the weird thing his neck spat out, and one of them recognised what it was. I think that's a bullet. They took him to the hospital because he was severely dehydrated and wanted to make sure he didn't have alcohol poisoning. They brought the bullet to the police. But apparently hospitals have a duty to report any gunshot or stabbing to the police. The police investigated it and determined that Fred was involved in the disappearance of Bethany a few months previously. Apparently, the bullet from his neck came from the gun of a man who was murdered at his home. The man's wife was taken and was never found. Anyway, they arrested Fred and charged him with the murder of the man named James Titus and my co-worker Bethany. Although they never found her body, they know he had something to do with it because of some clothing and DNA that they found at a house that he lived in with his parents. I don't think I'll ever get over the sight of seeing his neck spit out that thing. Apparently, the body sometimes does that with bullets over time. They said Fred survived because the bullet first went through his arm before entering his neck, like he tried blocking it when he was shot. The police tell me that Fred asked me about all that time. That when he gets out, we'll get married and all this other really creepy stuff. He's in prison for life now. But I keep having nightmares that one day he'll escape or that he'll be released for some reason and show up at my door, just like he had when I was in the changing room. Whoa! And that is the end of that scary story, guys. That was Fred the Vampire from my work by Marinera Ron. This one is called The Strange Passengers, posted by Reddit user past_pudding. past-pudding-7160. Okay, here we go, let's begin. There is a certain special romance in late, almost nighttime rides on nearly empty buses, when there are only a few passengers left in the cabin and a dim light of the bus lamps illuminates their tired faces. Some of them stayed late at work, while others, on the contrary, are just heading to work their night shift. Some live on the other side of the city, and long trips have become a familiar routine for such people. Workers and revelers, loving couples and elderly women with seedlings returning from their dacas, all are frequent guests of late routes. But quite often, you also encounter passengers of a rather strange appearance on such trips. They always board at unlit and deserted stops and immediately choose seats at the back of the bus. Try not to attract too much attention. They can be either men or women that look quite ordinary and almost indistinguishable from the other passengers, but that's only at first glance. If you start to closely examine these passengers, you might notice very strange features, like, for example, having 6 fingers on their hands, or vertical cat-like pupils. Some wear ridiculous headgear, various types of hats, caps, scarves, usually to hide the complete absence of ears. You might say such details should be immediately noticeable, but most people absolutely don't notice them. And even you yourself rarely look at people getting on the bus, especially when all of your attention is focused on your smartphone. In such moments, it's hard to notice the person walking past you with 2 left feet. But the problem is, if you start doing this, staring at the people boarding the bus looking for strange details, you will very soon catch a curious glance in return. They will start to examine you in the same way. And in this case, it's better to immediately try to look away and switch to something else. Start looking out the window at your phone, or lower your gaze to the floor. And most importantly, never look at a passenger like that in the eye for too long. Otherwise, you will very soon want to get off at the next stop. Get off together with the strange person, but it is a person at all. This is an article. An article from Secret World newspaper issue of 27th of the 5th, 2009. A series of strange disappearances began in the city of N. In a short time, more than 24 people went missing without a trace. Local newspaper headlines were filled with reports of an alleged maniac terrorizing the city and recommended staying off the streets in the evening. The police investigation led nowhere. No evidence of bodies were found. It was as if they had vanished without leaving a single trace. The unsuccessful investigation caused immediate uproar and led to a series of high-profile resignations and dismissals. Officials from the administration districts lost their seats, and the head of the city police department resigned. He was replaced by an unknown captain at the time, who promptly arrived from the capital with his team of investigators. Soon they resumed work on the case and began questioning witnesses and studying investigation materials anew. The new investigators managed to find 2 living people from a long list of missing. One of them was a citizen with rather marginal views who had been registered with the police more than once and apparently was mistakenly included in the list. He was not involved in the disappearances and was accidentally found during a raid on the city's seedy areas and shelters. After being fined for lack of registration, he was released and is of no further interest. The other missing person was directly related to the mysterious disappearances and was discovered by a patrol under mysterious circumstances. Around midnight, the duty station received a call from a local resident complaining about a man wandering around in bloody clothes. The called patrol found and brought the citizen to the city hospital's emergency room. When examination revealed documents, a wallet with a small amount of money and a mobile phone. These items, along with the bloody clothes, were taken by investigators for further examination because the man's body showed no signs of injury or violence. The only thing that puzzled investigators was the mental state of the found man. Poor man was clearly in shock and babbling incoherently about some dark people on a bus who supposedly took his legs. Therefore, he was sent to the city psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed calming medications and general complex therapy. Soon he began to recover relatively and even managed to answer some of the investigators' questions. But shortly after, his condition noticeably worsened, and 2 weeks later he died in his sleep from heart failure in his ward. leaving behind even more questions. Later examination results showed that the blood on his clothes did not belong to him. Moreover, this blood was not even similar to human blood in composition. According to the attending doctors, in the last days before his death, he was clearly very disturbed by something, was afraid to be alone, and kept rambling that they would definitely find him and take not only his legs but everything else. During the autopsy, it was found that his muscles seemed to have been gnawed from the inside. The muscle tissue even bore marks similar to human teeth marks. The pathologist attributed this to developmental pathology, but stated that he had never seen anything like it before. The man was buried in one of the city's cemeteries in the presence of a small number of relatives. At the moment, it remains unknown who is behind all these mysterious disappearances. Law enforcement agencies refuse to comment on this man. The newspaper's editorial office recommends exercising caution and avoid unnecessary outings in the late evening. And that was a Strange Passengers by Pass-Pudding-7160 by that Reddit user. Okay, guys, now and that is the end of the podcast, guys. But guys, this is going to be an extra segment, guys, on why I wanted to start this podcast, guys. Because I want to start this podcast because I haven't been recently doing ghost hunting videos recently. So I want to see if I can, maybe try something different, something new. So I'm going to be doing this weekly. I'm going to be filming this podcast weekly, guys. Where I'm going to read new scary stories, and even, scary stories, and also true scary stories, and also I'm going to be reading you some creepypasta stories as well. That's all going to be coming up soon on the Shivers and Streams podcast, guys. But guys, one thing to note, guys. I'm into ghost hunting, guys. I like scary stuff. I like horror films, horror TV shows. I like scary stories. I like writing my own scripts, guys. What I might do, guys, on this podcast is I might also try maybe reading out my own scary stories that I made, that I wrote myself. Because I've written loads of scary stories, guys, on my Google documents. I've written loads and loads of scary stories. Do Not Camp Here, the Scare Factor story, Randall stories. I've written loads of stories, guys, of my own stories. So I might also include them into the podcast as well, guys. So be sure to like the video, guys, and share the video, guys, to get this podcast out there, guys. I'm going to be uploading the podcast every Friday, guys. There might be a few weeks where I miss it on a few days because I'm going to be doing ghost hunting again soon, guys. So I might not have time to do a podcast, an episode of the Shivers and Screams podcast, guys. But I will try to do this weekly, guys. So next week, guys, I might try next week, guys, for episode 2. I might read some creepypasta stories because I've got a whole load of stuff on here about creepypastas. Yeah, I've also got Legends, Archives, and real ghost stories as well, and then scary stories, and also be on the lookout for more of these episodes coming out soon, guys. This is episode 1. I really hope that you enjoyed this podcast, guys. This has been the Shivers and Screams podcast, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time with another podcast or wherever that may be. Thanks so much. Cheers. Goodbye. Wow.